Now, after that, we have looked into the inputs and outputs when defining the scope, including the techniques like the brainstormings and the product analysis, document analysis, and the other key tools that is used when defining the scope. Also, we have looked into the scope statement. We have understood its importance in terms of aligning the stakeholders and mitigating the risks of ambiguity. Now let's have an idea about what are the challenges and best practices when defining the scope. So defining the scope of the project is critical steps or a critical step that lays the foundation for all of the subsequent project activities. However, it also can be considered as a stage fraught with challenges. In this session, we'll dive into the common obstacles and mistakes that encountered during the scope definition, such as unclear requirements and stakeholder conflicts. We'll also explore some of these practices and practical best practices that help ensure the project scope aligns with the stakeholder expectation and organizational objectives. By mastering these principles, project managers can prevent the scope related issues and keep their project on track. To start with the common challenges in scope definition. So, a project often faces hurdles in scope definition phase. And these challenges include incomplete or unclear requirements due the um, uh, insufficient stakeholder engagement or lack of, let's say, through data gathering. Stakeholders conflicts also arise when having a priorities or different priorities or objectives which are not reconciled early. Additionally, unrealistic goals or constraints can create misalignment between the project deliverables and the stakeholder expectations. So, addressing these challenges effectively requires a structured approach rooted in the PMI recommended practices. Let's dive into each of these, let's say, challenges, and we'll start by the incomplete or unclear requirements. So, incomplete or unclear requirements can derail a project before it even begins. And this issue often stem from limited stakeholder engagement or insufficient the use of data gathering techniques, such as, let's say, interviews or focus groups. So, if you haven't used these effective tools, you might find a gap between you and the stakeholders. And these consequences can be significant, including misaligned deliverables and project delays. To address this, project managers must adopt robust techniques and diverse techniques for requirements collection to ensure that all of the stakeholders' needs are truly understood and documented. So here we have identified exactly what are the root cause for such issue to have an incomplete or unclear requirements. As we say that the limited stakeholder engagement, the consequences, including the misaligned deliverables and the project delays, and the solution, we say that we have, let's say, to use multiple techniques and robust requirements collection techniques. The next one here we have is the stakeholder conflicts and misaligned expectation. The root cause behind stakeholder conflicts and misaligned expectation is having let's say different priorities by each of these stakeholders or lack of collaboration. The impact here might impact on the scope and it will cause, say, a scope rework and resource wastages. Solution here to avoid such pitfall or challenge, you need to engage with the stakeholder early and continuous way. To summarize what we have covered here in stakeholder conflicts and misaligned expectations, so we say that stakeholders conflict often arise when the stakeholders having different priorities or when collaboration is insufficient. This can lead to a scope rework, wasted resources, and strained relationships among the project participants. You, as a project manager, can mitigate these conflicts by engaging the stakeholder early in the processes and maintaining an open lines of communication throughout the project lifecycle. By fostering collaboration, they can align the stakeholder expectation with the project objective. Scope creep. Scope creep refers to uncontrolled expansion of the project scope without a proper documentation or approval. It often caused by an informal change requests or failure to establish and adhere to clear baselines. To prevent scope creep, project managers must implement robust change control processes and ensures that the scope baseline is well documented and communicated to all of the stakeholders. Again, this is a very important concept that you might see in the exam, also in real life, in a real world scenarios. So we say to define the scope creep, we can summarize it with saying that it's the uncontrolled expansion of the project scope. And the key causes for the scope creep, including informal change requests, or lack of baseline, or lack of having a change request or change control board to track all of these changes and implement them to the scope baseline. And the solution here is to use strong change control processes and clear baselines. Now let's move to the best practices for overcoming these challenges that we have discussed. The first one is to have or sure a clear documentation. Clear documentation is essential for effective scope management. A well documented scope statement serves as the reference point for all project activities. And we already have covered what exactly is the scope statements with its inclusions, exclusions, assumptions, constraints. So you need to have that well documented scope statement to cover all of these points and do not miss any of these. It should clearly define what is included and what is excluded from this project, along with any assumptions that have been made, and use, let's say, a standardized templates that can help ensure the consistency and clarity across all of the project activities. The next best practice here we have is the stakeholder collaboration. This is a very important, let's say, advice that we have covered many times when collecting the requirements, when defining the project, even when initiating the project. Again, so stakeholder collaboration, we can say that effective collaboration with the stakeholder is a key to define the project scope that meets their needs and expectations. This involves fostering transparent communication and leveraging facilitation techniques such as the workshops or focus groups, interviews to build the consensus. Also, regular updates and feedback sessions to ensure that the stakeholders remain aligned and updated with the project goals throughout its life cycle. The next best practice we have here is to utilize PMI recommended ITOs that we have already covered when defining the scope. So we said to utilize these project documents, the project charter, including the stakeholder register and some of these business documents like the business case. And we had an overview and more detailed sessions about the key tools, including the data analysis, expert judgments. Also, we need to have the output as the approved scope statement and the scope baselines. So again, PMI recommended these ITOs and provided a structured approach to scope definition. The inputs, as we discussed, that the stakeholder register and the business documents and the OPAs, also the EFFs and the project management plan itself offer the necessary context. Utilizing these, data analysis tools and data gathering, the prototyping and product analysis, and expert judgment, which enables the project manager to interpret this information effectively. Again, these outputs, which are considered as the PMI recommended ITOs, including the scope statement and the scope baseline, serves as a critical reference for managing the scope throughout the project. Let's now have a look at one of the real world example when, let's say, defining the scope for an IT project. In an IT project to develop a new software application, the project manager began by collecting the requirements through interviews and surveys. The stakeholder workshops were then held to clarify the priorities and resolve any conflicts and different priorities. And these efforts resulted in a comprehensive scope statement and a baseline, which were approved by all of the stakeholders immediately. And this alignment ensures that the project stayed on track and delivered the expected value. To summarize our session, a very important session that we have today is we say that the scope definition is a critical task, yet it's challenging aspect of the project management. By addressing common challenges like incomplete requirements, conflicts, and scope creep, and implementing best practices such as having a clear documentation and ensuring the stakeholder collaboration, project managers can ensure their projects deliver the desired outcomes. Also, we have a look about leveraging the PMI recommended ITTOs when defining the scope, which provides a structured framework for this process. And that will ensure the alignment and the project success.